Thank you everybody for joining us today for Ashika Theyyil's Capstone defense. This is the culmination of the Capstone process, which is also the culmination of the MCM degree. The Capstone, as you all know, has three components. There's an in-class component, which is worth 20% of the grade. There's a written component, research component, which is worth 50% of the grade, and then today's presentation is worth 30% of the final grade. The day will happen like this, or the hour will happen like this. Ashika will present for 25 minutes. At the end of the 25-minute presentation, we'll have a question period. The first round of questions goes to the examination committee. So your supervisor goes first, followed by your second reader. If I have any questions that come to mind during that period, I have the right as chair of the session to ask a question. And then we go to a second round. If there are no questions in the second round, then we actually open the floor to questions from the public. And so we have a number of members of the public here, including what I wasn't here a few minutes ago, but I assume it's your parents, Ashika. So feel free to ask your daughter a question about her work. It's totally legitimate, and often the most challenging questions come from family members and the public. Anyhow, and then at the end of that question period, we will then confer. The committee will confer with me as chair, and we'll assign a grade, and we'll let you. And then we'll rejoin the session, and we'll let you know how it went, how you did. So that's, without further ado, should we get rolling, Terry?
Yep. So Ashika, you now can take control of the screen.
Yes. So Ashika, the floor is yours. It's 3:32. So you have until 57 or 58. We could just call it until the hour.
4 o'clock.
Yeah, 4 o'clock to do your presentation. And then after that, we'll start with the question period.
All right. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for attending my defense. Before I get started, I would like to thank my panel of support, which is Dr. Terry Flynn, Dr. Alex Sevigny, and also Professor Aideen Carter, who's chairing for the first time. So this will be super exciting. I'm going to take you all on my journey through the research that I've conducted this past year on the excellence in digital storytelling. So I'm going to be exploring how best practices of digital storytelling and how it's embraced by different organizations and professional communicators. So let's dive right in. So if you're a professional communicator, you know how valuable storytelling is. We use it in our profession a lot, and organizations and stakeholders use storytelling to really understand each other. And that is the purpose of storytelling. In our digital era, and in the recent past few years, there's been so much rapid change in technology. So I was very curious to see how digital storytelling has an impact and influence with all this change in the digital landscape. I came across a publication by Coombs and Holliday called Innovation and Public Relations Theory that was published in 2018. And the two authors identified all the changes that was going on in public relations and multimedia and the rapid advancement of technology. But they also noted at the end of the paper that there was a research gap, that the actual practical application concerning how communicators are adapting to the digital changing landscape is a big question mark. And they further probed for more research to be done in this area. I then took it upon myself to look more into this. Another thing that they looked at was the narrative transportation theory as a game changer. This theory states that the most effective stories allow for an audience to become travelers when they encounter text, transported from their reality as a return changed by their experience. So the key here is storytelling now, with all the changes in digital media, is all about engagement and experiences. It's no longer linear. It's no longer putting out information and not expecting anything back in return. Users and audiences want to feel experiences. So exactly with how we say content is king, engagement is key. So now I want to take a look at the research questions that I used to further explore this study. I looked at 3 research questions. The first one is, how and to what extent are best practices for digital storytelling embraced in organizations? Secondly, I looked at how and to what extent does digital storytelling affect organizational reputation? And lastly, I combined these 2 questions and I wanted to see what executive level management and if they're aware of the return on investment and the impact of digital storytelling in an organization. If we dive into the literature review, it's important before starting any research to know what information is already out there. So the first lens of research that I looked into was, what is digital storytelling? Now, I found that digital storytelling pretty much operates the same as traditional storytelling, except the only difference is it is applied through multiple digital platforms online. That's the only difference. As I briefly touched upon before, there is a digital shift that is occurring, and we see that newsrooms are shrinking. Organizations are now their own newsroom, and companies share news stories on their own channels and platforms that the media then picks up. So that is the biggest shift that we're seeing in digital storytelling now. We also see Dimitrov in 2020 also commented on this and said that in-house production of content is becoming more prevalent in organizations because we have all this technology. Organizations also have high editorial standards that they can produce in-house. They don't need to do anything else. We already have the tools that we need. And to top this off, it was super interesting because Rockwell in 2020 conducted a seminar about video and storytelling, and he mentioned that more videos have been produced by an organization today in the past 30 days than it has been produced by television network in 30 years. So that goes to show how much has shifted and changed in a short amount of time. And with all this change in the sea of information, it's also important to acknowledge that we are also coming across misinformation too through these digital stories. And so there's more of a call for organizations, since they have the knowledge of the information that they're sharing, to take back that remote control and take control of the narratives with digital storytelling. I also looked at reputation in digital storytelling, and in reputation, it basically summed down to organizations earn strong reputational capital when they show genuine concern for public conversations and for the public itself. So we'll see that more in my research. As I continue on to the literature review, I looked at trends in the emergence of user-generated content. There's a lot to explore in this area, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. We'll see more of it on my throughout my research. But some of them is, there's game-changing new media, and this includes 360-degree videos, augmented and virtual reality. So it's really exciting with all the new content that we're seeing out there. But it's also important as well that as much as we have all this content, we have relationship building with digital storytelling, and that's where public relations comes back in. So Tomke in 2019 wrote about connecting on a human level and the importance of not losing that with all these digital storytelling mediums. And to add on to that, for the public relations communicators that we have out here, the father of a lot of our theories, Grunig, he speaks on symmetrical communications and how organizations need symmetrical communication to balance the interest of both the publics and the organization. And that is how communicators and both users can retain value from the content. If we look at best practices and engagement, excellent communication basically boils down to having a strong collaboration between the organization and its key stakeholders. And high levels of engagement is when values of both stakeholders and organizations are mutually met. I'm going to dive into my methodology moving forward. So I triangulated my research, which means I looked at 3 components. So first, I looked at the extensive literature review to see what was said about the topic and what was mentioned. And then I moved forward to in-depth interviews and a content analysis. The in-depth interviews I conducted were around 45 minutes in length. Once I got clearance from the McMaster Research Ethic Board, I went ahead and obtained verbal and oral and written permission from my interview participants. And I interviewed 12 communication professionals that are self-identified storytellers. It was important for me to have a diverse set of voices in this area and have robust information. So I didn't just stick to digital storytellers or communication professionals. I looked at content creators. I looked at media production managers, chief digital storytellers. And I looked at people with a range of a lot of experience from 3 years to up to 35 years. So there were junior and senior level contributions in this research. A lot of these people have published work in blogs and seminars, and some of them are actually from our MCM community. So that was really exciting to look into that. Once I spoke to my interview participants, I decided to understand excellent communication and digital storytelling. It is very valuable to study the best of the best. And so for my content analysis, I looked at 2 platforms that were shortlisted award-winning content pieces from 2018 and 2019. These were global contributions. These 2 platforms was the One Show and the Digital Dozen Showcase. And the reason why I chose these 2 platforms is both of these platforms have been peer-reviewed, they're public, and if anyone ever wants to replicate this study, they're able to do so because all of the information is there and it's accessible to everyone. So the One Show has been around for 40 years and it highlights the best digital story content year to year. And same with the Digital Dozen Showcase, except that is by the Columbia Digital Storytelling Lab. And both of these platforms looked at different multimedia, I analyzed different multimedia content from both of these platforms, which I will further explore and look into. So if we look at research question number 1, I looked at how and to what extent are best practices of digital storytelling embraced in organizations. So when I analyzed content in my content analysis, I found that majority of the content was video-based content. This also supports the literature that video is a popular medium. Other content that I've looked at was augmented reality, interactive websites, gaming, social experiments, interactive storybooks, social media, AI, poster, and immersive live theater. So you can see that there is a wide range of, when we speak about multimedia and best practices, there are so many opportunities to explore. And one of my interview participants added on, and she said, it's important to make stories like a Netflix series where you leave a cliffhanger at the end. These are techniques that filmmakers have used over time in their stories that make it interesting for their readers. And I noticed this theme throughout all of the content that I've analyzed. When it came to my in-depth interviews, I asked 2 questions. The first question that I asked was, how do you ensure that you have a team that cares about digital storytelling? And the second question I asked my participants is to share what they think best practices are and any advice to ensure that best practices are embraced in organizations. And so the results of this, you can see on the left side, I grouped the themes of what people have spoke about, but the main thing is when it came to having a team that cares, most of my participants mentioned that having a team that's already equipped with multimedia skill sets is very essential, and it's important to involve the whole team. Another thing is to look at the story as a priority over the platform. Most digital stories are effective when the narrative takes a priority over the trends in media and technology, and that's what a lot of the participants found did well. When it comes to feeling nervous around digital storytelling, participant B suggested that there are a lot of people that work in digital storytelling that are not necessarily creative. I don't think you have to have creative work in digital storytelling, but you have to at least be open to the creativity. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Especially when you work with executives, you have to work at trying to integrate that. And the best way to learn this and to study this within organizations is to study award-winning campaigns that tailor to these concepts, and then kind of figure out how your organization or your sector can personally adjust to this. For research question number 2, I looked at how and to what extent does digital storytelling affect organizational reputation. I had a criteria list of a whole bunch of things that I looked at, but when I came down to boil down to reputation, in the literature, there were 3 key factors that suggested reputation was its strongest when it had these 3 factors, and that was credibility, permission, and authenticity. The reason why I put this out here is I found this was a very interesting finding to me, because a lot of the criteria I looked at scored high because the stories that I looked at were already the best. So they already had high levels of visual engagement and interactivity. But when it came to credibility, I noticed that it wasn't as strong. And I found this interesting, but one possible explanation for this is that most of the stories on these platforms were more focused on engagement and being interactive, and they were less focused on promoting sales and brand identity, because credibility in the literature was defined as overtly communicating your brand value and your brand identity. So in these stories, they didn't necessarily overtly communicate that. However, they did have high levels of permission to operate in that space, and they were authentic and unique. And so in a way, this allowed for audiences to better participate in the stories. When I look at credibility came up in my in-depth interviews as well as a common theme. I found that when a brand is affiliated with other established and trusted brands, messages became more credible. This is a very interesting contemporary example that one of my participants shared, participant A. So to explain this notion, she brought upon this idea, a hypothetical situation. On the weekend, I'm going to be hanging out with hip hop artist Drake. He said, as long as I wear my COVID gear, I can go to his house. All of a sudden, I'm hanging out with Drake and my reputation goes up. Nothing else or no one else at his house knows me, but Drake wants to hang out with me, so I must be cool. It's really about leveraging and borrowing the brand of others. And she came down to that point where she said, you have essentially elevated yourself into the midst of these industry and thought leaders. When you collaborate, you have that credibility. So that is what a lot of my participants were saying in terms of credibility. They looked at credibility as collaborating with other trustworthy brands to ensure that credibility is at a high level. And finally, in my research question number 2, another key finding that I found interesting was I asked all of my participants if digital storytelling is in their organization's mandate. This means, is it part of their mission, vision, and goals? Is it something that they practice every day that's written in hard copy? And I found it so interesting because a lot of the participants agreed that organizational reputation is a long-term investment. But although 100% of the participants agreed that building reputation is directly tied to digital storytelling, it was very shocking to see that not many people, less than 50%, actually included this in their organization's mandate. So I even had one participant at one point, a participant I mentioned to me that she finds digital storytelling and reputation are pretty much married because it's in everything that a company does. Yet it was pretty interesting to find that it wasn't in the actual analysis. Also, 58% discussed that they do regular reputation tracking in their organization. This includes post-analysis and analyzing how a sentiment changes over time once a digital storytelling effort has been launched. And lastly, for question number 3, I looked at how and to what extent is executive level management aware of storytelling's potential return on investment and its impact on organizational reputation. So to break this down, once I asked participants if they felt that it was valuable to have C-suite buy-in, 33% found that it was valuable to have buy-in from the C-suite, but there was a disconnect between executives and junior specialists. And a lot of this disconnect comes from ideas around comfort zone in digital storytelling and the intent of digital storytelling. If we go back to the literature, Chen and Chang in 2019 spoke about how disinterest in digital storytelling amongst senior leadership can be a failed opportunity to really develop reliable and trustworthy content. So this is something that's also really important. If we look at the second part of the results, I looked at return on investment, and I found that the higher return on investment had a lot to do with the duration of video content. So short and concise videos led to high levels of engagement. And one participant brought this up and mentioned that within the first 30 seconds, it's an indicator if an audience is going to continue watching. And there's a quote here by participant G that talks about if a video content is too long, no one's going to simply consume it. So that has become an essential part. Duration plays a part in whether people will tune in or not. And another participant mentioned that she uses the elevator approach with her team, where they try to craft a message in 10 seconds, and that's how they see if it will be successful or not. And this can be pretty overwhelming because there's so many different platforms to use. And when it comes on return on investment, it can be difficult to understand what is going to bring you the best return on investment. What platform do you use? But to summarize this really well, participant K mentioned a unified approach. And I don't know if many of you know, but during quarantine, if anyone's on Instagram, DJ D Nice is a household DJ that recently boomed up in popularity. He pretty much spins DJ records in his living room. So the participant K spoke on DJ D Nice, and he wrote that if D Nice became Instagram's DJ and YouTube invited him to participate in a show, YouTube is where you're getting all your tutorials, all your uplifting information. That content might then go out to Twitter, and Twitter is reposting central. So then that content can be reposted and reshaped, and Twitter can also make that content go viral. So it just goes to show that it doesn't matter what platform you are on. If you have a unified approach to storytelling, and if your story is well crafted, then it will thrive. 41% spoke to creating content that is relevant to an audience, and participant B further explained this with, how is your presence on your phone or their computer relevant to their lives? You need to have relevance so that you are not tone deaf. And you also need to know what is going on in a broader societal context. So here, when we're talking about relevance, authentic and diverse content ensures that content is relevant. And organizations build stronger relationships when they give that genuine concern to the public, and they do provide that value to their audience. Jumping off a broader societal impact, we are currently going through the COVID-19 crisis. And another theme that participants have mentioned is that pushing sales information was inappropriate during COVID-19. And they spoke to this a lot and suggested that it's not something that necessarily did well. And this also is backed up by literature, where feel-good stories that focus on human experiences have the most positive reactions. There are notable limitations in this study to be aware of as I move forward. Jumping off the COVID-19 pandemic, I actually conducted all my interviews in the midst of this crisis. So that has influenced my sample size. I've had a limited sample size because of that. And factors including personal stress and professional stress during this time may have influenced my responses. As communication professionals, we're on the front line of a crisis. So a lot of that has influenced the limitations in the study. Another thing to consider is I was the only sole researcher working on this. So researcher bias may be present, and that's important to acknowledge. Also, I had limited access to digital content. Some of the content that I spoke about required special equipment, which I did not have. And there's also limited research in this digital landscape to begin with. So that's another thing to keep in mind. That being said, there's a lot of room to explore for further research. It would be quite interesting to look at how digital storytelling plays out post-pandemic and have an analysis on that. There's also an increasing role of live video that's coming out. I don't know if anyone's watched NASA's SpaceX launch, but a we're seeing a lot of organizations use live video, especially now, to really connect with users. And user-generated content is also an interesting area to look at, to analyze the sentiment and reactions of what audiences feel when they interact with digital content. Another area is activism and its impact, which we're seeing a lot now. Digital storytelling in the academic sphere. How are we learning this in public relations? How are we teaching this? That would be really interesting to look at. And how user-friendly digital storytelling can be. So that's another area to further dive into. And to conclude my 3 research questions, for the first one, when it came to digital storytelling and how it's embraced in organizations, the main key takeaway is that communications professionals do recognize the importance of multimedia skill sets. However, few participants have actually made that a central part of their organization's mission and practices. So there is definitely room for growth in that area. For research question number 2 that looked at reputation, interactivity, strong visual appeal, authenticity, and permission were key factors that scored high in the content that I looked at. Overall content that was less promotional and more focused on user experiences did well. And for research question number 3, when it came to return on investment in digital storytelling, the duration and audience retention really played a role. So the shorter the content, the more user-friendly and the higher retention. So before I leave off, I want to give you top 10 recommendations moving forward for any communications professionals here. So the first is to develop a digital toolkit. And this means to really cultivate a workspace where you celebrate digital storytelling. You can host workshops and also bridge the gap between senior and junior specialists. You can look at case studies and look at different areas. Be open to creativity. Ensure content is user-friendly. As I mentioned before, first strategize a story, then figure out the platform. Include digital storytelling in your mandate. If it's important, we need to practice it. Number 6 is focus on long-term reputation building. If you want your organization to be pandemic-free during the crisis of organizational reputation, it's important to look at your actions of what you do now, and that will have a long-lasting impact later on. Another thing is to humanize your content. So treat your brand as a person. In that way, you can really truly connect with users. Visual elements are always a win. Collective team effort, include everyone in your storytelling efforts. And lastly, find solutions to meet audience needs. To finally summarize everything, I would like to leave off by saying that there are boundless opportunities in digital storytelling, and there are so many stories that are left untold. So as professional communicators, I urge everyone to look for stories and look for those opportunities because it can significantly influence your organization's reputation. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Very nicely done, Ashika. Great presentation. You came in 1 minute before the time limit, which is now what we'll do is we'll go to your thesis supervisor for the first question.
Thank you, Dr. Sevigny. I was thinking that your broadcast journalism training was really helpful because I was worried that you weren't going to make the 4 o'clock deadline, and you did. Well done. Congratulations on that. A very interesting study. I've lived this study with you over the last 12 months as you began to conceptualize it and see where it can be applied. And I think you've done a good job in making it real, taking difficult theories like narrative transportation and trying to fully understand that and to weave it into a way that organizations can use digital to further engage, build reputation, and build collaboration with all their publics inside and outside the organization. So at the end of the day, aren't digital storytellers just broadcast journalists who've left the mainstream media and joined public relations?
It's an interesting thought. I would argue that the lines, as the research shows, the lines have now blurred a lot. And as organizations have their own newsrooms, I think there's a call for public relations to also have this knowledge at hand, to provide information, because public relations, we are the gatekeepers of the information in our organization. So I think it's beneficial for everyone to know, and it can add a lot of value to the field.
But if I want to staff up a more robust digital storytelling unit within my organization, shouldn't I just hire broadcast journalists?
You can, but the problem is if you were to do that, you miss what public relations really brings, because public relations ensures that symmetrical communications, it ensures that we are actually truly connecting and relating, creating experiences and meaning with our public. So someone that may have that experience of creating the fancy technological content can make a video look great, but to have that understanding behind it, and the research supports that it should truly be an experience. So you might miss that element, that engagement level, because broadcast journalists may have that knowledge to an extent, but the way public relations brings that in is a whole other ballpark. So I think it's very valuable to add that both together to truly get a robust feel of digital storytelling.
You mentioned right off the bat work by Tim Coombs and Sherry Halliday about narrative transportation theory.
Right.
And narrative transportation theory is near and dear to my heart because it really is a behavioral science, right? To be able to connect what it does to you. So tell me, how do you think narrative transportation theory can be used more fulsomely in the field of public relations?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. So Coombs and Holiday only touched upon narrative transportation theory, leaving it off saying that this is going to be a game changer in public relations and this is the future. Narrative transportation theory, to break that down, it essentially just comes back to when they talk about allowing the audience to really feel like a traveler in a story, all they're essentially saying is, you have to make sure that you feel that your audience is truly engaged. And we talk about engagement right now in public relations. It already exists when we talk about excellence in public relations. It already exists when we talk about all these different buckets of how communicators can better communicate. But narrative transportation theory itself is kind of the glue that bridges this new medium of digital storytelling that we're seeing today with the previous research of symmetrical communications and best dialogues, and really connecting and finding that win-win between organizations. And adding this to that layer really enhances the digital storytelling experience.
That's all for now. I'll wait to the next round. I have one other question. Professor Carter, over to you.
Hello, congratulations. Great job on your presentation. I have two questions for you. First, your 9th recommendation talked about how you need to have diverse parties within the organization contribute to digital storytelling. If you're having various people across the organization do this, how can you make sure that the story that's being told is grounded in what your brand or your organization is truly about?
That's really interesting. So when I talk about diversity, I'm also looking at, it's important to have diverse viewpoints, but diverse viewpoints also entails as diverse viewpoints amongst senior level executives and junior specialists as well. It's important that at the end of the day, if we have, everyone in an organization knows what the organization needs to promote, but we might miss some stories from other people in an organization. So to have that diverse viewpoint, it becomes really valuable. And it's about including that team for that, because a lot of points can be can be missed if you don't include that. And an example of this is in one of my, in some previous research that I've done, one of the participants mentioned to shift focus from, especially during the COVID crisis, a lot of organizations were selling things and putting out promotional content. And one participant mentioned, you know what, our organization actually took a step back and we decided to shed light and promote stories of employees at this time. It makes the content more human. And that also works two ways because employees also feel valued as well. So diversity can be really strong in that aspect. Yeah.
Okay, great. That actually ties in a little bit to my second question, which is, do you think digital storytelling is more important within the organization? So you just touched on making employees feel valued versus external to the organization.
Yeah, so it's a really great question. I think it's valuable both ways. It's inevitable that it's everywhere. We're using it already. To have it internal is one thing, but to have everyone on the same page, I think that's where I'm kind of grappling with this research. It seems like everyone internally has an idea of its value, but that also needs to translate externally as well. To have everyone on the same page. And the benefit of having strong digital storytelling internally and externally is that at the end of the day, you are not only providing value as an organization, which will benefit your internal employees, but you're also really strengthening the relationships with your external counterparts as well.
Awesome, thank you.
So I had a question and just an informal one based on a quick read of your paper and listening to you today. First of all, great presentation, very well done, very engaging presentation. And I wanted to ask you whether you think it could ever be, whether one, because I know you're interested in artificial intelligence and technology. So I was wondering if you think that we can ever find a way to put a value, like a monetary value or a quantitative value onto the value of digital storytelling within a communications effort.
That's really interesting. Can you clarify by what you mean by quantifying it?
Yeah, like if if we wanted to put, let's say this becomes a component that you're selling as part of a campaign, or you're pitching it as part of the functions of a group, and you wanted to find, and someone said to you, okay, so how do you put a dollar value on this, right? Like how do I know whether or not this is generating return on investment?
Mm-hmm. So one way that that's actually a very interesting area to dive further into, but one way that I can touch upon very lightly at its very base level is one participant that I spoke to how she uses in her organization, she looks at the views and just the viewership level and monitors how that drops when a video is live. So that's an interesting thing to look at. So we're seeing live video rise a lot. So maybe a lot of people tune in at the beginning, and then it would be interesting to use AI to see during a live video feed the different elements of when people tune in and when people maybe tune out, and what drives more emphasis. I think that's one way we can use AI maybe and kind of collectively look at all those high points of engagement and bring that back to how effective the digital storytelling is, especially because live video is booming as the research shows. So that would be that's one interesting way that I would suggest.
Great, thanks. It's just a question off the cuff.
Yeah.
So we have time for a second round for Terry and Adine. Would you have any other further questions, Terry?
Yeah, I do have one. This notion of how digital storytelling can build thought leadership and enhance reputation and credibility. And as such, the outcome is that organizations succeed in achieving their goals and objectives. So how would you use digital storytelling to help promote the MCM program?
Oh, put in the plug. How would I use digital storytelling to promote the MCM program? Okay, so the MCM program, first we have to look at what we have already, and we have multiple platforms, but based off of this research itself and what I've presented today, it seems that a lot of people are interested in video content. So I would suggest putting out more video content, more live create live stream content on anything interesting that we do. And in one of my tips, I also talk about humanizing content. So, a lot of schools have this big persona of a certain type, but maybe show the daily lives of people, especially during COVID. I think that would be really interesting. And to see that we're more relatable. One example of this that I've seen is during my research, I came across Emirates, the airline. And what they did was they actually used TikTok. They didn't use TikTok, but they used the element of a viral challenge that was on TikTok. I'm not sure if many of you have seen it. It's like you pass a makeup brush or something, and then someone receives it, and they do something, and then they transform, and then they pass it on to another user. So it shows that we're all connected. And what Emirates did was they did this with female pilots. So they passed on a female, like a pilot hat, and it showed mothers and during COVID, during quarantine, in their daily lives, and they would receive the hat with their kids jumping on a trampoline, pass it on to another person. So it would be actually interesting to look at in that area, viral trends can be kind of fun because the MCM program does have students, right, as an audience. So especially during a time like this, positive content does well. So and it kind of goes against counter programming as well, which is something another user explained in my research. And I didn't really speak about it because I had such short time, but he mentioned this term of counter programming. And he talks about how when things are chaotic, so during this pandemic, we don't want to hear stories about people being stuck in quarantine and being stuck inside. We want to hear stories about how people are free and liberated and happy. And it's kind of like this counterproductive approach. So I would suggest for MCM, for McMaster right now, to put out content and put out stories that are positive, that can maybe coincide with some of these trends with live video, but also, have that professional base in there as well.
That's all I have.
How about you, Adine? Any further questions?
One really quick one, as you think about, you've talked a lot in your paper and in your recommendations about using all of the various people within the organization. What are your thoughts on engaging an external agency to support digital storytelling? And what I don't mean is the production of the story, but the genesis of the story and the content.
That's interesting because a lot of organizations do that, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I just find that if we look at the research, it's important and it's valuable to have, even if we do have that, it shouldn't take away from the people internally in the organization, because it doesn't really solve the issues with the gaps that we see between junior and senior specialists. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there in that area to further develop. So even if we do bring in someone, it won't be much of an issue, but it does take away from opportunities, I would say, where we can strengthen digital storytelling internally. I wouldn't recommend it right off the bat, because here in the research, I'm trying to say that, communicators, we do have the ability ourselves. We don't necessarily need an external agency. We just have to look for those opportunities. And to explain that a little bit deeper, another thing I didn't get to touch upon in my research was, while I was conducting this research, I was watching CNN, and Zoom, the founder of Zoom, was on the news for because there was a lot of misinformation with Zoom that he wanted to clear up. And he's a Chinese American, and there was a lot of information. People had a lot of political thoughts about Zoom, and there was just a lot going on. But if we take all the political stuff aside, it basically comes down to, here's an organization that's a tech organization. It provides value to people all the time. But because they didn't have any kind of, they didn't humanize their content, they didn't have much digital storytelling efforts, we only know Zoom as a platform that we use. Beyond that, we don't know much, because there hasn't been much digital storytelling efforts. And we see this a lot in tech as well. So I think it's more about looking for those opportunities, because going back to that case, if the founder had, you know, taken efforts for digital storytelling, and if we look at the long-term impact, and we say trust is a currency of interactions, and if we had constantly put out content that built that trust, we wouldn't have a huge, it wouldn't come down to a huge misinformation or a huge issue. So there's a lot of ways that organizations can actually implement this, and it's about finding those opportunities. And to find those opportunities, we have to see what people outside are saying as well. So that sums that up.
Great answer. Thank you.
Okay, so we have about 4 minutes for questions from the public or from family. Do we have any questions from our gallery or from Ashika's parents?
They asked me all the questions yesterday.
No questions from the gallery? This is unusual. This is a first. You must have wowed them with.
All right, I'll ask.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. We shook the tree.
I know how uncomfortable this moment is in the defense, so I don't want to prolong it too much. Thinking back to both the Dean's question and Terry's question. So one on engaging external vendors to sort of help with creation of narrative, but then also internally the place of public relations within the organization when it comes to storytelling. Did you find anything in your research or come to any conclusions in your paper around the sometimes at odds relationship between marketing and communications within an organization, and who owns storytelling and narrative, particularly as it relates to brand?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Actually, to be honest, in this research, the platforms that I looked at itself did have a marketing base to it. So the lines were a little blurred itself, but when it actually comes, and that's because we're talking about content in that context. But I had one participant talk about, so she was a digital storytelling expert, and she consults organizations. And one thing that she found that she completely despised is when she goes to an organization's website and the About Me page is just a timeline of what a company does. She's like, that's not a story. I don't know why people think that's a story. And she blamed, well, she essentially said that that was marketing that's done that. But I guess in something like that, we don't really know. It could be, hiring an external agency. So that's why it's really important to really have your, sorry, Aideen. I didn't mean, I wasn't targeting you there.
I was just laughing. I thought it was funny.
This is an external participant of mine, just sharing. So it just comes down to, there are areas definitely where the lines are still blurred. I'm at 100%, but I didn't touch too much on it. That was the only one comment I had. And I just found that interesting to ponder on because I guess, again, that's where public relations can really come in. And it comes down to those theories that we learn in public relations. It's so important because if you don't know these theories and you're blindly using technology and you don't consider excellence in communications, then you miss a lot of opportunity to tell digital stories really well.
Thank you very much, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, we don't have any more time for questions unless there's somebody with a burning question. I'll give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So no question, no more questions from the gallery. So now what we will do is take our conversation offline, Terry and Adine and myself, and we will be back in a few minutes.
Yeah, so you people don't go anywhere. We're just going to stop your video and mute your mic, Adine and Alex.
Yeah.
And then I will start the call, okay?
And we're back.
We're back.
And your second reader, Professor Carter, has the honor of telling you what we've discussed.
Okay, so I think, well, I can't hear.
Can you hear us, Alex? Oh.
No, I can.
Can you hear us? No.
Now I can, yes, yep.
Okay. So Professor Carter has the honor of sharing your news.
So great job today, Ashika. We want to congratulate you on successfully presenting and defending your capstone. You did a fantastic job today, and not only are you officially done and passed, but with all of your efforts that have gone into this paper and this presentation, you have passed this paper with honors. So well done.
Yay, congrats.
Do you want to say a few words?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate all of your support. For everyone that's here today, I see a few of you now. I want to thank each one of you for attending, and thank you to the faculty at MCM. And I can't believe it's done. I'm a little shell-shocked.
Yes.
You're fun. Enjoy it. Revel in it.
Yeah.
And thank you to your parents.
Yes.
Been strong supporters of you along this journey. I know that they have probably pushed you harder than you at times want them to push you. But not only did you shoot the puck, but you scored on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So one quick housekeeping note. We're going to sign the Clear to Graduate papers today or this evening, and they'll be processed tomorrow or the day after. So you can, as soon as those forms are signed, which will be tonight, you can use the MCM post-nominal title. So you can write down on your LinkedIn that you're Ashika Theyyil, MCM as of now.
Thank you.
Congratulations and welcome.
And we will work at pulling this video together and send it to you for your review and approval, and then we'll post it on the website as well.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Congratulations, Ashika, and thank you everybody for participating and attending, and we look forward to the next capstone soon. All the best.
Congratulations.
Bye.
All the best.
Congratulations. Bye.
Time to celebrate.